This video is about the percent of increase and decrease. So in order to understand that, we need to look at the formula. And what the formula tells us is that to find the percent of change, we would in the numerator put the amount of the change, divide it by the original amount where we started from, so that it's changing from something, and we would multiply it times 100, because multiplying something by 100 moves that decimal place over and gets us a percent. We remember that a fraction can be changed into a decimal, and by moving the decimal point 2 places to the right or multiplying times 100, that will change it into a percent. So let's talk more about this little formula here. And we need to understand that the amount of change is basically subtracting the amounts. What did you start with? What did you end with? How much did it change by? And then our denominator is always going to be what we started with. Now that's going to find the change. Now the important part after that is to note, is it an increase or is it a decrease? Depending on what's going on, that's what we need to find out. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of problems, and we're going to look at percent of increase and percent of decrease. So first problem we're going to look at here, it says before is 12 and after is 15. So let me say I went shopping, and before I went shopping I had 12 pairs of shoes in my closet, and after I returned from shopping I now have 15 pairs of shoes. We can tell the difference, or the change, is going to be 15 take away 12. And that I started with 12 pairs of shoes before I went shopping, right? And then we're going to multiply that times 100. Well, when we subtract 15 minus 12, we're going to get 3. And then we're going to divide that by 12 and get 100. Now I'm going to bring up my calculator at this time just so I can show you how this works. We're going to say 3 divided by 12. We're going to get a number, and then we're going to multiply that. See that decimal, that 25 hundredths? That's that fraction, 3 divided by 12. And then what we're going to do to turn it to a percent, we're going to multiply it times 100. Once we do that, we see that we get 25. So that is our percent of change. So it changed from 12 to 15. That was a 25% change. Now, because the number went up, it is considered an increase. So a 25% increase was that percent of change. Here I have another example where before I have 125 and after I have 100. Let's say I was about to sit down and I had in front of me 125 pistachios in their shells. And then after watching a TV show, I had 100 left over. So we've got to note the change. So we start with the difference, or the change itself, which is 125 minus 100. And we're going to divide by the original amount, which is 125. Again, to get the percent, we're going to multiply times 100. 125 minus 100 is 25, divided by 125 times 100. Once again, I'm going to bring up that calculator. I'm going to clear it here, and I'm going to show you 25 divided by 125, and we're going to get 2/10. So that's for the fraction. That 2/10 represents this fraction, but we want it to be a percent. So that fraction turned into a decimal. Now we want this decimal to be a percent. So we're going to multiply times 100, and we're going to get 20. So we find out that this has a 20% change. And because it decreased, it went down, we're going to say that it is a 20% decrease. We're going to practice a few more. Here's another one. Before is 6 and after is 4. So let's say I had 6 tangerines in the morning that I carried to school, and by the end of the day I had 4 tangerines left. So the change in the tangerines, 6 minus 4, and I started with 6 times 100. Once again, that 6 minus 4 is 2, and that is our fraction, or that's going to be our change. We're going to use our calculator. Hopefully, there it is. And we're going to say, clear it out. And we're going to say 2 divided by 6. Now, when we see that, when we do 2 divided by 6, let me get those numbers for us here. 2 divided by 6. We get a repeating decimal. Now, we don't really are too concerned with that, but we want to turn it into a percent, so we're going to multiply it times 100. So in this repeating decimal, there are 2 ways that we can show this. I'm going to move this over to the side a little bit so you can see part of it. We're either going to call this 33 and 3 repeating, or we're going to call this 33 and 1/3. Because if we reduce to 6, that's 1/3. That's the fraction. So we're going to take it as a percent, and over here you could do this as a percent. Either one will work. And because there was, I ate some of the tangerines, so there's less. So in other words, it decreased. It went down. So we're going to call this a decrease. So either way that you would show it, either as a repeating decimal or as with a fraction is correct. Now, if you were estimating this, you could say this was approximately 33% because it's closer to 33 than it is to 34. Let's take a look at a couple word examples, a couple sentences. Here it says, yesterday I went out and picked 30 oranges from my trees. Today I plan to pick 39 oranges. I have some great orange trees in my yard that give some great oranges. So let's write down the change. 39 minus 30 divided by, I started with 30. I'm going to multiply that times 100. So the difference or the change was 9. I'm going to divide by 30, and then I'm going to multiply times 100. So get my little trusty calculator back here for us. Clear it out. So I have 9 divided by 30. And I have 3/10, and then I want to multiply that times 100 because I'm going to look for the percent, and I get 30. So we find that this is 30%. So we're going to write it has a change of 30, and we went from 30 to 39, so that went up. So that's going to be considered an increase. As you can see, this is something very simple and very basic. We do a couple more problems. There's a change from 8 to 9 and 6/10 as an average on a 10-point quiz. So once again, we're going to grab the numbers that show a change. So the change is from 8 to 9 and 6/10. Don't get pulled in by this 10-point quiz. This is just telling us some more information, has nothing to do with the change. We see a lot of students grabbing the wrong numbers by accident. So even though we're writing the change this way, it starts from 8. So that's the original amount where we started from, and it's going to be times 100. Now if I have 9 and 6/10 and I take away 8, I'm left with 1 and 6/10 divided by 8 times 100. I'm going to bring up my calculator, clear it out. 1 and 6/10. I'm going to divide that by 8, and then I'm going to multiply that by 100. And here I have 20. So what I found out is that I have a 20% change. And it changed. It went from an 8 to a 9 and 6/10. So it increased. So for those of you who are taking a test, you went from a B to an A. So we can see how that changed. Just changing from a B to an A is a 20% increase. That's pretty good. All right. Let's take a look at the last example. Example 6. It says, we ended with an average of 2 and 2/10, but started with an average of 6 and 3/10. So these are the numbers we're looking for, but it's really important to know that this ending number, that's not going to be our denominator. What we've been doing is if you get in the habit of just grabbing numbers and going, once again, you're going to be grabbing the wrong numbers. So we have 6 and 3/10. We're going to subtract 2 and 2/10, but we started with this 6 and 3/10. Not the 2 and 2/10, just because that's the first number in the sentence doesn't necessarily mean that's the number you started with. We're going to multiply that times 100. If I subtract 6 and 3/10 from 2 and 2/10 from 6 and 3/10, I will get 4 and 1/10. I'm going to divide it by 6 and 3/10 and multiply that times 100. Once again, I'm going to use my calculator, and I have 4 and 1/10. I'm going to divide it by 6 and 3/10, and then I'm going to multiply that times 100. And we're going to get a number that's repeating. You can see that repeat. Oops, let me bring that back up. You can see that repeat of 079365. That's going to keep repeating over and over and over. But we're going to estimate this to the nearest whole percent. So we're going to say that this is approximately 65% change. And what kind of change is it? it ended up as an average of 2 2/10 and started with the average of 6 3/10. This is a decrease. It's a huge decrease, but it's a decrease. So hopefully by watching this video, you're able to understand the difference between increase and decrease in a percentage, and also how to find that percentage of change.